So I'd say
you'll be dripping in sweat by the end. It'll be great.
Dear listener, if you're listening on Spotify, Apple, Google, and it's the autumn or winter and you're listening back to this episode, know that we've really fallen on our swords for you today. We are all absolutely suffering to bring this podcast together, but it's worth it. And we've got a nice, easy track. So at the end of the podcast to drive around, and you've got a nice car, a nice, easy to drive car as well, Chris. So
yeah, piece of cake.
Yeah, we shouldn't be sweating too much, but we'll come on to that. So, Chris, thank you for having us. Thank you for having me, Chris.
That's what I'm supposed to say if I wasn't so ungrateful.
I know. Thank you for coming on the show, is what I'm trying to say. And I was thinking about this episode before we started, as I always do. And I was thinking about kind of the questions to ask and kind of what road do I want to go down. And obviously it's difficult for me because obviously we know each other. We've done a lot together in the past. And I also remembered that I've interviewed you before.
You have?
Really?
I have.
Is that both of us forgot it?
Yeah.
You did, for the article. Yeah.
The Comms Bible. I'm not sure where the Comms Bible is at the moment. It was a great idea. It was a sim racing magazine. I think a few more have come along since, but it was one of the early ones. And we went through an hour, I think, of interview. And that
was just question one.
That was just question one. Yeah, we do like to talk. We're very similar, you and I, in that we do. When we get going, we really get going. So Chris, as in Grid Finder, Chris, you're going to have to really police this. There's been a few conversations, and the one that I remember the most was, and I'm gonna see the smile come across your face here. Was we were sat in the sunshine drinking a beer on the rooftop bar at the pits at Spa on the way back from Sim Racing Expo last year, watching the cars going around the track, just thinking, imagine what it would be like to go racing in real life. Like, we could make this happen. Like, we should do this. And it just went on and on and on. And luckily we had another 12-hour drive ride back from Spa all the way back to Milton Keynes. So we had time to flesh it out.
We did, as it happens. Yeah. I was back there a couple of weeks ago, and it's hard not to sort of go back to that particular memory, because it was just one of those lovely moments. We were driving back from Expo. We thought we'd just go and have you'd never been to Spa, so we thought, the road goes right past it. You should at least be able to go and have a look at it. There was a track day on, so we just nosed our way in, bribed the security guard, wandered in, went up to the bar over the pit lane, and apparently you hatched a plan that, sort of spiraled out of control fairly soon afterwards.
Yeah, at that point, this could become a thing. And Toby, who's in the chat, obviously was monumental to making that happen. But I want to go back, right? So I've spoken a little bit about the conversations we've had recently, but I first discovered Chris Haye somewhere off the coast of Qatar in about 2000. It would have been 2020, February or March time. I was at sea. I was on a big ship going from Qatar to France, and COVID had hit. And I'd been told that I was going to be stuck on this ship now for months. It was meant to be 6 weeks, but it ended up being about 5.5 months. And this is where my passion for sim racing was born. So I came across some YouTube videos about sim racing. I'd never kind of gone into it very much at all. I didn't really know what sim racing was. I'd done a bit of Gran Turismo and Formula One, but that was it. And I came across a couple of videos and I was really interested, and I downloaded them when I had a little bit of Wi-Fi in Qatar. And I watched them between Qatar and France. And in that time, I was like, oh, you know what? I could really get into this. I love all the aspects of it, the racing, the competitiveness of it, and the hardware. Everything was kind of speaking to me. So I was like, right, when I get to the next port, I'm going to download a load of videos that I can watch for the next couple of weeks at sea. And I downloaded your series, your Beginner's Guide to Sim Racing. I think it's 1 through 12. I think it is 12 episodes. And I downloaded them, and then I watched them back to back at sea between France and wherever the hell we went next, somewhere else in the world. And I remember at that point, at the end of that series, being like, right, yep, sim racing is for me, and I know everything about it.
Oh.
Right?
And your opinion has changed since, yes?
And then I met you. I was like, oh, okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, rather glad that you didn't end the story by saying I discovered Chris passed out in a bus stop, which is how a lot of those stories start. But yeah, well, we had a follow on from that with Darren, who was sharing the car with us earlier in the year, who I think after the third or fourth time meeting me, finally worked out that he knew me from those videos as well. He'd watched them, and he pulled this crumpled bit of paper that was one of the PDFs I put together out of his back pocket, and he said, "No, I use this. I've got it taped to the sim rig." So it's certainly I think it's that series of videos which is focused mainly on sort of car setup and some of the sort of technical stuff. Is a pretty common onboarding point for, I guess, what I would describe as the type of person that's already sort of drunk the Kool-Aid and wants to take it a bit more seriously and, you know, throw their life away into the sim racing well.
Yeah. And how did you get to that point? Because that wasn't your first video, not by a long shot. I appreciate that some of these questions I've asked you before for the Comms Bible interview, and I remember the answer, and I remember being really cool. What was your first video?
Yeah, I think the first video I actually made, whether I uploaded it or not, is a bit hazy now, was just a sort of standard man drives car, does some commentary video. But the thing that sort of, I think, inspired me to get started on YouTube after years and years and years of sim racing, mainly on my own in single player stuff, a little bit of online stuff, was Assetto Corsa was really booming at that point. The modding scene was really booming, and I was starting to see search out videos about mods that I like the look of when, you know, I had downtime and I was bored and definitely not at work, you know, to find out what was good. And, you know, there wasn't really a lot of content that was covering that side of things. You know, people like Jimmy would occasionally do a race in a good mod, but, you know, that was probably about as close as it really got. And there were people uploading compilations of just like a lap of them driving a car, but it didn't say anything about it. So I thought, maybe I can give it a go. You know, I had a background in photography. I was a professional photographer for many years. And so I sort of had one aspect of it there. And I'd been to art school for university, and there were enough pieces that I thought I could give this a try. And that first video did quite well. The ones that came after, less so for a while, as I was sort of finding my feet and working out how all of it worked. And yeah, it was probably I'd say it was probably a good 100 videos or so before I got to that setup guide. So I think that's one of the big aspects of YouTube that, well, it's very easy for me to forget, is that, you know, it takes a lot of time to sort of refine what you're doing and understand your own voice and where you sit in the sort of niche and surrounded by all of the other creators and everything else. So there's, it's a bit of a journey.
That's a cool journey, because I actually found you from the exact same collection of videos, and I've watched it through probably 3 or 4 times now. And I'm sad to say, I still don't know how to set up a car correctly at all.
You know what it is. It's a practice thing as much as anything. So I understand the theory very well, but if I go for a long time and don't do a setup on a car in a particular sim, I'll start again, and, you know, it takes me a few passes at it to really get back to where I was. I think, like any skill that requires retention of a huge amount of knowledge and then sort of filtering that through like the specifics of the thing you're doing, you know, you really do need that kind of routine, you know, switch off the brain part to work, rather than having to access the memory banks, or worse, you know, actually, you know, I've had to dig out my own script for that, for one of those videos at one point in the past, where I was just like, does this work this way or does it work the other way? Because, you know, you just get yourself confused. So I wouldn't feel too bad about that.
Well, sim racing is one of those amazing things where, like, you don't necessarily have to be good at it. You just have to love it, you know?
Absolutely.
I think we've all fell into the habit of, you know, you buy your first wheel and it may be this little cheap one that maybe doesn't even have force feedback, and that's when you go, wow, I can really see how this would all of a sudden be very addicting or very fun. You know, I say addicting, but fun in general. And then you're in that never-ending oh, I should get this wheel. Oh, I should get this base. Oh, I should get these pedals. And then that brings us back to, people like you, content creators like you, that there's so much information nowadays on sim racing. You type best pedals for sim racing and you can spend a whole entire evening thinking that a different set of pedals is the best pedal. Each new video you start watching.
Us content creators are very much the problem, not the solution to that particular aspect of the hobby. But I always maintain the point that if you want to upgrade gear, you should do it because you want better feeling, because you want a better experience of sim racing, not because you want to go faster. Because, as many people will know, loads of hot lap leaderboard times are set on, 15 or 10, 12-year-old Logitech G25s.
Yeah,
I would argue maybe it's a bit more difficult to be consistent on that kind of equipment, and that there are equipment upgrades that you can do that do bring you the ability to have a better feel from the sim, a better understanding of how it's communicating with you. But realistically, I've got all the gear I could ever want here, and a really talented kid with a secondhand G25 or G27 or something is still going to kick my ass.
Yeah. Because I'm a kind of a hot lap kind of guy. I don't normally go and race other people unless I happen to be racing with Tom over here because he likes to push me onto those servers, which ends up being fun. But on a day-to-day basis, I like to go and just do hot laps. I'm on the track by myself. I can throw on a Netflix movie and just kind of hang out, run through some laps. But I'm always like, maybe if I tweak this little setting or tweak that little setting on the wheel, I'll just get a little bit faster around corner 2. And it's never the case. Someone's 30 seconds faster than me for some reason. And I, just have to sit back and go, well, whatever. I guess it's just for fun in the end. And that's what draws me to games like Forza Horizon and just kind of the open world, have a blast, drive a bunch of cars, do crazy stuff. What was your first sim game that grabbed you completely, and I'll use your phrase, made you drink the Kool-Aid for sim racing?
I don't think I coined that one. I think it was a much darker situation than this.
We're going to repurpose it for good.
Okay. My entry point to any driving game at all, sim or otherwise, was probably the most common for anyone in the UK, at least in their 30s, and probably the best possible start to funnel you into the sim rabbit hole. It was the first Microprose Grand Prix game, Jeff Crammon's second or third, I think actually technically, racing title after the very popular Revs. But this was the first proper full color attempt at producing a Formula One title. It came out in 1991. My dad, no, I think it was the 1991 season. It came out in 92. My dad got it on his 286 or 386 or whatever Intel computer we had at the time. And, I was 6 or 7 years old and in love with Formula One. So, of course, I was going to try it. And it was and is still brilliant, far ahead of its time. And for a long time, with the exception of the progression of that series of games, I don't think there was a lot that matched it for a really significant period of time. I don't know what Jeff is doing these days. I think he stays out of the public spotlight, but he is definitely someone I would love to talk to about how sim racing's developed since.
Tom,
it's all his fault.
Write that down for a guest, possibly.
Hey, if you can get Crammond, you're doing better than so many others that have tried.
That we'll put that on our dream list. Thanks for the recommendation. So, what was your first wheel that you ever got?
Well, that happened a couple of years later when Grand Prix 2 came out, again, Crammond, and Microprose. And my father brought home a second-hand Logitech, wash my mouth out, a Thrustmaster T2, which was the second, I think, wheel they ever made. I made a video, I bought one again a year or so ago, and I made a video restoring it and making it work on modern hardware on the channel, which was a passion project of mine. It was a video that took weeks to produce, and you didn't do so well to start with, but it found an audience, I think, amongst the sort of retro gaming enthusiasts more than sim racers. But it's this, by today's standards, horrible plasticky tiny thing that you stick on your desk. No force feedback. The only feel you get through the wheel was self-centering that's provided by a bit of cut-up section of common bungee cord. I mean, it literally has all the little stripes and stuff that you'd normally get. Like, they didn't even get a bespoke bit of elastic to do it. They literally got bungee cord and cut it into lengths, tied it off at both ends.
The wheel.
Yeah,
that probably helped you restore it, though, because if it's just common things that you can go pick up at the hardware store, you're like, oh, it's just
very much.
This.
I didn't even have to go to the hardware store. I had enough spare bungees lying around that I was able to replace those bits. But I mean, yeah, you don't get
modding.
any.
That was your start in modding in some ways.
Yeah, there you go.
Indeed, I should have upgraded it really to a slightly higher spec, military grade bungee or something. But no, the thing with that is that you get, because it's an elasticated spring, you get quite a lot of force towards the end of the extension of the elastic, but very little towards the center. And anyone that's ever driven a wheel without force feedback will know it's keeping the car in a straight line, just those tiny fine movements that's a nightmare. And some proper self-centering force around the center would have been very, very, very helpful. And when I plugged it in and fired it up for the first time, the upgraded one, it brought back all of the memories, good and bad, about trying desperately to control 200-mile-an-hour Formula One cars with a wheel that really doesn't want to stay exactly in the center.
Yeah, that reminds me of the experience I had with the Logitech G29, actually. So I loved that wheel for a very long time until right in the middle section of it, just like you're saying, when you're trying to go straight, there's like this little gap between the gears that you can go back and forth, and there's absolutely no response in the force feedback system, but your car is still going back and forth on the track. That's ultimately what made me go, okay, it's time to change out this equipment, because this is bugging me enough to the point where now I'm not enjoying using this hardware anymore. And I noticed.
I don't want to accuse you of having a psychological issue called gear acquisition syndrome, which I know I definitely have. But I too invent very small reasons why I desperately need to upgrade gear. So
I'm like, I can't go straight. That's why I'm losing time. I can't go straight.
And of course, because of this tiny little gap in the center, you're like, I need the DD2. Because only the DD2 will solve this problem, which is where you went.
Yes, it is. And now, speaking of Logitech, I noticed very, very casually, you said Logitech, and you said, oh, no, I got to wash my mouth out, Thrustmaster. Is there some kind of disdain there for Logitech product? Of course, Logitech, we're just joking.
No, I think, Thrustmaster were earlier in the game of sim wheels, and I think it would be doing them a disservice to take the credit away there. Logitech at the time, it would have still been a large, fairly mass market PC peripherals manufacturer, which is where Fanatec sort of started in that market as well, and then specialized into sim racing products. But I think Logitech were quite a bit later to the wheel game than Thrustmaster were, so who were very much in the flight sim and racing space earlier on, the simulation space at the very least.
Flight sims are where I first started hearing Thrustmaster's name around my interest levels, because Ace Combat or X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, whatever, stuff like that. Yeah, those are fun. Part of me has thought about maybe doing a small bit of flight sim upgrades to everything, but then you go look at the prices, and I was like, oh, I thought sim racing was like the outlier in the cost of upgrades. But no, you can get full cockpits from a jet that have all the switches and all the bells and all the things I would have no idea how to use as well.
But you would start flying on your controller, and then there'd be this little dead zone when you're trying to fly straight, and you'd be like, well, I'm going to have to get a full wraparound cockpit now. Otherwise, I just can't fly straight.
So speaking of which,
not joking.
Sorry, I have to continue this thought, because around a week ago, I was driving home from an event fairly late in the evening, and I passed the sort of forward fuselage section of Harrier jump jet on the back of a low loader in a supermarket car park. My first thought wasn't, why is there a Harrier in the supermarket car park? It was, I bet someone's turning that into a sim.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny where your brain went.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll be arriving at Chris's house in about 3 weeks' time.
I would be dangerous with a budget. I think that much is clear at this stage.
I would be dangerous with a budget. That is a great quote.
So let's talk about sim racing gear for a minute. So we're at a point in sim racing gear where things are really, really good at the moment, right? I mean, things feel realistic. Well, realistic in regards to simulating something, obviously. Do you think there's a lot of room for us to get better and better and better features on these things? Or do you think we're kind of at like almost a tipping point where things are going to kind of slow down and stop almost?
I think that's a really great question. It's something I've been thinking about and talking to people in the industry about fairly quietly recently. And I think, particularly when it comes to wheelbases, we've had technologies that have had their time. The gear-driven stuff is very much a thing of the past now. The belt-driven stuff is dying off, and everyone is flooding in with direct drives at every price point, and they're all pretty similar in the way they go about their business. Sure, there are differences in the type of motor used, although they're subtle. There are differences in the control electronics, but again, that's a lot of that's price pointing and quality that comes with that. Fundamentally, they're all quite similar. And then there's the software that controls all of them. And, we've all got to this point where I think that side of, say, the direct drive market is quite mature. Yet still more companies flood into it. And, I think we're going to see some of the bigger names finally revealing the bigger sort of mass market names revealing their offerings very shortly now. I'm not going to say any more about that, but the point is you're going to have dozens and dozens and dozens of options to go and buy a direct drive wheelbase shortly. And the differentiators really are more down to things like the ecosystem and what kind of peripherals you want to use it with, whether you want compatibility with consoles as well as your PC or consoles alone, and all of that kind of stuff, more so now than it used to be, which was, when there were only a couple of options in the market, or even before direct drive wheels, it was all about performance. So, yeah, I think you're fundamentally correct in the sense that in terms of wheelbases, there's a level of maturity and things already have started slowing down. So in answer to the second part of the question, what happens next essentially is, well, maybe we see a different type of technology enter that space that changes the business side of how that works. I think one of the things that Tom and I have discussed about going and driving in real life is, where the differences seem to lie between sims and the real world driving really aren't things that are going to necessarily be able to be replicated well through the wheel now. And you end up with the fundamental physics problems of being able to, simulate some of the physical forces stuff that really does inform how a real car behaves. And I think we're in a process of refinement in force feedback within games. We're in a process of refinement with how the wheels themselves process the force feedback signals, how they bring in telemetry separately from the game to augment that, and how you filter it, how you, the individual settings and controls influence that signal. And, we're at marginal gain stages, I think. And sorry, I appreciate this is a very long answer on a very technical, probably potentially quite boring subject. But I think that's where I'm at with it. I'm waiting for the great leap forward, to quote Mr. Billy Bragg there on that technology.
It's interesting. Go ahead, Tom.
Sorry, I was just to pick up on that. How about VR? Because I still think there is significant headroom in the VR space. VR is okay, but gamers are now used to 4K, 144 hertz, this, that, and the other. And the head tracking, eye tracking, resolution, depth perception in VR is actually quite limited. There's quite a lot more that they can and are doing in some of the prototypes. So do you think that will play a part in the sim racing hardware game?
Maybe, yeah. It's an interesting question. I was an early adopter of VR. I had an early version of the Rift, which I loved. It came along at a point where I was getting really seriously back into sim racing after just sort of playing a few sort of casual games for a few years. And it was brilliant. The first time you put a headset on and you jump into particularly like an open wheel car, I think it was a Formula 4 car or something like that. And I look down into the apex of the corner and I can see through the suspension into the apex. It's like, wow, yeah, that's what I've been missing. This is brilliant.
Yeah.
The spatial awareness that you get from that, the depth perception, there is no doubt in my mind that helps. But all of the things that you've said are still, despite significant improvements, an issue with VR, as is practicality to some extent, because depending on your sim racing discipline, VR can be quite uncomfortable. If you're going to go and do a 12-hour endurance race and you've got to do a triple stint in the middle of it, 3 hours or 4 hours in the car in VR on a hot summer's day is just horrible. It really is. So I still have this feeling that despite everything that's great about VR, I still wonder if it will always remain secondary to monitors just because of the practicality side of things. And I hope I'm wrong.
I think you're pretty accurate there, honestly, because 4 out of the 5 people that I had actually sit at the sim rig with the Oculus Quest on in AC, they've gotten motion sickness from it. So now I don't suffer from that, luckily, but there's a lot of people that can play video games on a monitor perfectly fine. Nothing happens to them, but you throw a VR headset in there and then all of a sudden their brain expects the G-forces and expects to feel things differently, and then they just get that little bit of a queasiness that doesn't allow them to play the game. So I think you're accurate on it's always going to be kind of a niche thing that is an accessory on top of everything else that we have.
Yeah, maybe when we're at the stage where Google Glass style headset, where you can see through augmented reality, you've got airflow through it and all of the other good stuff, and some clever stuff to sort of trick the motion sickness problems. I think those are all things that can be technologically solved, but at what cost? How do we power the unit? How do we run all of this, these ridiculously powerful computer signals to it? Because I don't know, you guys have been involved in gaming long enough to know that there's rarely ever a point where your PC is powerful enough to do everything you want it to do for more than 12 months or something. So everything always scales.
Yeah,
and outscales us. Yeah,
and then if that is strapped to your head as well, like the heat that would come off of that to achieve what we want it to achieve. You'd come out of a gaming session with like a kind of panda style sunburn around the eyes.
We just need to go back to old school X-Men, the cartoon days, and have the danger room.
Right.
You walk into the room, close the door, and then boom, you're at Spa or you're wherever, and you're just getting into a car. Right? That would be the day. That
would be the day. That would be great. Where were you at hardware wise when you made your first video? So what stage had you got to in your hardware journey when you were like, you know what? I think I could do something more with this.
It's an easy one. When I got, as I say, I've been racing in sims with various level of seriousness since the sort of mid-90s, but I didn't do a lot from about 2010 until 2014 when Assetto Corsa turned up. And I bought a Thrustmaster T300 because that was the wheel at the time. I think the TSPC was out as well, but that was it was a bit more expensive, and it wasn't obvious what benefits it really really gave, which I think is a perennial problem for Thrustmaster, is understanding that ecosystem. I try. I'm I'm a member of the industry. I talk to all sorts of people about this stuff on a day in, day out basis, but still sometimes I get confused about which wheel exactly does what. So it's funny how things don't change as much as anything. But no, I had basically what was the, one of the two entry level wheels at the time, which would have been, I think the G27 was still the current Logitech wheel, although the G29 would have launched about that time, or the Thrustmaster T300. They were just sort of the two wheels that were about. I went with Thrustmaster for reasons. I know the exact reason. It's because they did a Ferrari 599 rim with Alcantara around it, and that just looked miles better than the sort of plastic pretend car rims that came with the other Thrustmaster wheels and the Logitech
same thing. I was doing that Logitech G29 T300. What do I do? And I saw the open wheel add-on wheel for the Thrustmaster, the Formula rim, and that was enough for me. So I chose Thrustmaster because of the wheel, not because of the base.
Well, I mean, that's, they'd kill me for saying it, but that's 90% of Fanatec's business model, isn't it? You give people enough options, there's going to be something that appeals to them. Obviously seems to work on all of us.
Yes, it does.
They've figured something out, right?
Oh, for sure.
So
yeah, I think my point, with the point with the T300 there, is that, to be a sim racer, you don't need expensive equipment. To be a content creator in sim racing, you don't need expensive equipment. To be involved in communities or building things or creating outside of the sort of YouTube space, producing your own stuff, modding, etc., etc., none of this requires high-end equipment. And I try and stress it as much as possible, even though I do review high-end equipment. It's like all of this stuff is nice to haves. None of it really is gonna massively change your life. It might make your experience while you're driving better, but ultimately, at the end of the day, if you've got a wheel that produces force feedback and you can understand what the sim's communicating to you, then you've got most of it there, I think.
Right. Now, you mentioned, you said, I'm part of the industry, which I think we all would agree. When was the turning point when your content went from, I guess, just like a small operation where you're just having a couple followers, and then all of a sudden it started exploding and brands started contacting you and you started really kind of diving into the world of sim racing content?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it's difficult to answer, if nothing else. But it's what everyone wants to know. Like anyone that wants to get started in creating something for social media is always really keen to know what's the point it's gonna, it's working and it's gonna be a thing. And there's no, like most things, there's no one single turning point. There's no light bulb moment. There were, in the early days, I didn't have anyone contacting me to review stuff, so it was all stuff that I bought or borrowed from friends and scrounged and those kind of things. And I've always had a policy of not really reaching out and asking for stuff from manufacturers. I don't know why. To start with, I didn't really feel like I could provide the return on investment that was necessary while I was still learning the ropes. And as I've sort of progressed through, it's got to a point where I can't review as much as I'd like to. And it's going to sound like an awful first world problem here, but, I have to turn down a lot of stuff. So I think that it's very difficult to define a tipping point. There are a few points along the way where I thought, okay, this is a thing. And if I apply myself, I can make something out of this, whether that's just something I'm really proud of or whether that becomes a career or whatever. I think it's probably worth mentioning that when I started putting videos on YouTube, no one was, there wasn't really a single person in the sim racing space that was doing it full time. There were people like Inside Sim Racing TV who, were running that as a business, but Jimmy hadn't reached 100,000 subscribers at that point. He was maybe at 60 or 70K. Streaming from his shed, and that was clearly growing. But there wasn't. Yeah, the landscape and the size of sim racing has expanded so much during that time that it's very difficult to think of that. I think the the one thing that really stands out as something that changed the way I looked at what I could do with this this whole YouTube thing was being invited to be part of the broadcast team in 2018 for the then fledgling SRO GTC esports series, which was sponsored by Blancpain at the time. And being invited out to Monza and Spa and Nürburgring and all of these places that are dreams, absolute pipe dreams to be able to just go to as a fan, let alone be invited into the paddock and to talk to drivers and be around this racing series that I've been following for years and was really heavily into at the time. So it was a dream job, and it opened my eyes for two reasons. One, that people within the industry had a level of trust in what I was doing, that I wasn't going to cause them any issues. and number two, that there's a lot of money going into that, and that if people are putting that kind of money into sim racing, then they see it. The money people see the value here. And when the money people see the value, other money people see the value. And as we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years, the influx of, well, everyone and their dog into the sim racing industry with seemingly endless pockets full of cash has rather changed the landscape a bit. So again, very long answer for what should have been a simple question. My apologies.
It was never going to be a simple answer, right? There's so many different factors. There's so many different signals that you'll have to have been watching for to be like, oh, okay, this is a thing. But like, if you don't mind me saying that, when I think of your content, I think of your videos, I always think of three things. I always think of the hardware first, because it's one of the first things that I saw. Then I think of the setups, and then I always think back to your starts in modding. So those got the three things I think. Now, what I'd like to know is how much of that was intentional. So when you started, did you just do the classic, I'm going to do what I enjoy, I'm going to test things out, see how it goes? Or did you have a bit of a strategy that you've got these kind of three pillars and you're going to just try each one? And at what point did you think, I need a strategy because this is becoming a thing? and how did you then come up with that strategy?
That's a great question. Certainly to start with, there was no strategy at all. It was just making videos that entertained me or on subjects that I hadn't seen other people talking about, particularly on YouTube as a platform and in video. I think to some extent, as the follower number started to grow quite rapidly, I realized that certain content worked better than other kinds. And there has been a constant background struggle in my mind since that very point that I started to understand a little bit about how the algorithm works and how the audience responds and what you need to do to kind of please both sides of that coin, between the idea that realistically, I really just want to make videos for me. But if I want to see the channel succeed and to grow and to continue to be pushed out to new audiences, I also have to play the game. So, for example, if you're going to produce a video comparing the 4 cheapest or the 4 best entry-level sim racing wheels on the market, say, for example, that the best time.
Switch to the name.
Yeah, but yeah, so yeah, comparing 4 entry-level sim racing wheels. I could put that out today, and it would because it's kind of evergreen content. It would do fine. But if you put that out in late November, when people are searching to buy a sim wheel, they're searching for gifts for people. They're the ad revenue is better at that time because all of the companies are churning money in for the Christmas spend. The sim racing companies are sponsoring it as well, and it's a delicate balancing act between keeping the audience happy and keeping YouTube happy. And YouTube is at its happiest when it's making money as well. So as much as I would love to say, yeah, I only make the videos that entertain me, that I want to make, and I'm approaching this as the same way I approached everything when I was at art school. The reality of the situation is that there is more strategizing needed, and it's an ever evolving process. And I can give everyone that's here a bit of life advice. Don't get in a room with 2 or 3 YouTubers at the same time, because you will lose your mind listening to them discussing the finer points of the algorithm and trading strategies and stuff. And, you know, I've been in rooms with other sim racing content creators where we've got onto that subject, and people have literally died. Like, you know, the case is pending, you know. It's a genuinely horrible situation to find yourself in, and I wish it upon no one.
Which of the categories have you enjoyed the most? Because you've obviously explored a lot, and you've even done a little bit of streaming, but I know that's your kind of least preferred. You do it more for fun with your community than anything else. But of all the videos you've done, the categories, the niches, even, which ones have been the ones that you enjoy the most, the ones you remember?
I'm not sure it's necessarily niche based, but it's anything that I can do something creative and, you know, really play with the form of creating video and telling a story and narrative of the visual storytelling side of things. And anything like that is the reason I do this. And sadly, that doesn't happen with the gear reviews. So that pretty much straight out, the gear reviews, if I had to drop one type of video, I think it would be that straight away, just from a purely enjoyment side of it. As much as I find ways to make them interesting for me, and I do mess around with the format quite a lot, and I find ways to enjoy the filming of that. I think anything that
you go all in on that on filming hardware. Sorry to interrupt, because I just want to pick up on that. Like, your hardware videos are not just your standard hardware video person holding thing, looking at thing. Like, you've shown me pictures of the rigs and the panning thing, whatever that's called, that goes across, and the way you set up the lighting and the surfaces. And so there's an element of creativity. You've found your own way to make that creative, right?
I mean, and that's, I'd say 80% for my own amusement more than anything else. You know, I do it that way because I was a commercial photographer and I have an interest in cinema, and you know, I want to create things that are visually interesting and beautiful more than I want to necessarily create a comparison review between 2 very similar sim racing pedals, for example. So for me, the enjoyment probably more leans into the actual the creating side than the actual informative side on, you know, that particular kind of video. So it's always, for me, it's the videos like the building a mod track of, you know, based in the airfield next to where I grew up, where my parents' house was, and, you know, I walked around as a kid. It's restoring the Thrustmaster wheel. It's going and doing those documentaries that we did with Gridfinder, with the racing team. It's anything that is an enormous amount of hard work, takes a massive amount of planning, days and days of shooting, days of editing, just a massive amount of work, but produces something that I think is unique and nobody else in the sim racing space has done. And occasionally maybe no one else could do, but I don't allow myself to think like that too often, because you know, let's keep the ego under control. But as I said earlier, I'd be dangerous if I had a budget, and if I showed you the list of videos that I want to create, I probably have 100+ video ideas that I would need a team of 5 or 6 people and a budget of 20 or 30,000 pounds just to realize each of those ideas. That's what I'd love to do. Whether that is even remotely plausible on my journey is a question that is well beyond my pay grade. But yeah, I think that is the woolliest answer to a question I've ever given. But yeah, I love the creative stuff.
And your creative process for choosing what you're going to do next, because I always, this is something about content creation that always baffles me, is any content creator puts so much time and effort and soul into a project, and when it's finished, you then put it out to the world, and then they tell you what they think of it, you know, with their 8 minutes of watching plus 30 seconds of writing. You know, the amount of time that goes back into these comments, but these comments mean something. How have you found that?
Well, I think first of all, it's interesting that you think they watched the whole video before getting ragey on the keyboard. I think you're being very charitable, Tom. For the most part, I get very, very little abuse in the comments. Whether it's the type of content I make or the way I make content, I think maybe it attracts a slightly more mature audience. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and I'm not egotistical enough to think that I'm doing a better job than those that do get more abuse. So I think it must be down to the demographics. But yeah, the reality of YouTube is that you do get some pretty vitriolic and pretty insane stuff written from time to time. Mostly, in my case, the stuff seems to be people that are just a bit misinformed or they've misunderstood. I can't believe I'm about to say this because I think it's manifesting destiny again. I made a joke in a video a couple of years ago. I can't remember what the video was, but it was on Formula One. It was some sort of Formula One based topic within sim racing, not on just Formula One itself. And I made a comment about Max Verstappen at the time. This is long before the Lewis rivalry and all the craziness that's kicked off between both of those sets of fan bases since. But I made a comment that was relevant to something Max had said in the press about the Codemasters Formula One game that week. And I can't remember what it was, but it was something like, I really enjoy the Codemasters Formula One game, despite what Max has said. It was something really innocuous like that and really specific about it. But I still get maybe once or twice a week, people finding, Max Verstappen fans, finding this video, misunderstanding what I'm talking about because it's 2 years or 3 years removed from context, and getting some pretty spicy abuse for it. So there's stuff like that in there, but that's easy to dismiss because it's patently stupid, it's absurd, and I understand why they've made that connection. The stuff that sticks with you is the stuff that maybe they're 20% right or 30% right, and you can't just dismiss it as this person is a joyless, miserable person who the only fulfillment they're getting in their day is typing out a rubbish message on YouTube, and that gives them a tiny little bit of a glimmer of a smile in their otherwise bleak existence.
Wow, that is a real persona you've built there, Chris.
I think it helps to think about negative commenters as sort of Dickensian villains, but it's when people are right and they call you out for something that you've said, you've made a strong opinion about something, or you've stated a fact and you're wrong. And when that's done in a constructive way, it's not a problem. But when it's nasty and it's at least partially right, those are the ones that stick with you. And I'm not gonna. I have a policy of not giving any platform to anyone that's being negative. I don't talk about it a lot, but you'll see a lot of content creators from all sorts of niches, but particularly sim racing, when they get stupid comments, they'll post them on Twitter and have a laugh about it, or they'll get angry about it. And at the end of the day, these people are trolls. They're there to gain attention, and broadcasting it to a wider audience sort of defeats the object of it to me. So I'm not going to repeat any of those comments, but there are probably half a dozen over the 4 or 5 years I've been on YouTube that I could probably remember word for word, because
yikes,
they terrible people were slightly right.
Yeah.
But you generally try to respond to most of the messages on your YouTube video for a while, right?
Yeah, I think for the first few years I responded to every single comment. I'm sure a few slip through the gaps, but it's at a stage now where it fluctuates, but we're probably talking over the body of videos. It's a couple of hundred comments a day. And if you're spending, and loads of these are really well thought out, thoughtful comments, and lots of really good questions that require thought out answers. And 200 comments, if I just spent 1 minute on each one, that's 3 hours of every day gone straight away. It's totally unsustainable, and that's one of the worst things I think for me is having to sort of transition away from responding to everything. So now I tend to just respond to stuff within a certain sort of time of the video being live, and don't generally go back too often to the older stuff. Because I mean, the other problem is you know, they'll ask you a specific question, you know, oh, you were talking about dampers during this video, and you said something here, and you know, what did you mean by this? And so, I don't know, I filmed this 4 years ago. I've got no idea.
Right.
And you know, you watch the
mentioned,
video, you're still not sure.
Yeah, you're like, I don't even know what I was thinking. That I need to edit that now. You mentioned making a track of an airport that you grew up near, and actually, this comes from one of our viewers as well, where he first saw your "I made my own track for Assetto Corsa." I'm assuming we're talking about the same exact video there, and Toby says that he thinks it inspired a lot of casual modders. So, like, through that process of making your own track and getting it into AC, what advice do you have for the people that kind of want to get into that? Because, you know, I've even myself thought at times, I'm like, you know, it would be kind of cool just to put like my neighborhood in a sim and just drive around in the sim.
Who hasn't?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that you know, my earliest memories of thinking about Formula One, on being a Formula One fan, was, you know, imagining what the walk to school would be like, the roads I walked to school would be like with Formula One cars going down them. So this isn't a new idea. It certainly isn't a new idea for me. And I think it's something that's absolutely common to every racing fan out there. And what Assetto Corsa in particular has allowed is for people to dabble in that environment and produce those kind of things for themselves. Now, I should be really clear. I produced this in a program called Racetrack Builder, which is sort of like the equivalent to it's like Lego for Assetto Corsa modding.
Okay.
It's not. This isn't producing a beautiful scale model that's going to go in a glass cabinet in a museum somewhere that people are going to marvel at. It's producing something that's blocky and resembles mostly the warship or the aeroplane or the car or whatever. So what I did was a rough and ready thing that allowed me to live out a childhood dream and do something fun and, you know, engage with sim I really love in a different way. And I would advise everyone out there to have a go at that. But that, call it modding, I think is a big stretch. The difference between that and what a proper track modder for Assetto Corsa does is absolutely massive. You know, they're producing proper 3D models of absolutely everything, from the groundwork to the buildings to all the trackside features and stuff, doing thousands of hours of 3D modeling and producing all of the physics that work with the track and all the surface and the textures and everything else in a way that I just didn't do. I bought a Lego kit, a box of random parts, and I assembled it into a configuration that pleased me. And it's a wonderful thing to do. It's a lot of fun, but it doesn't produce something that I think can be compared to, you know, say something by the likes of Lil Ski or Brun or and I apologize to all the other Assetto Corsa track modders out there that I've Fat Alfie, that was the one I was trying to think of. All these people producing great bodies of work in the Assetto Corsa track space with you know, beautifully, exquisitely detailed tracks that they obviously have an affinity and affection for, that they've absolutely slaved over for thousands of hours. Whereas I, you know, spent maybe, you know, 40 or 50 hours on the project, a lot of which was, you know, spent doing the filming side of things and capture and all of that as well.
Right.
So that was a very defensive answer, wasn't it?
No, it's fine. But sometimes, you know, when I sit and think about modders, because I'm a software developer, so I'm not doing 3D models and things, but the sheer dedication that these modders have to make these tracks, like you were saying, there's the attention to detail and the amount of hours that they spend, and then they throw it up on Race Department for free. I'm like, what? That is just absolutely amazing, sir. But
well, it's a fundamental issue within sim racing, actually, that you've touched on there, and that it's a hobby that, or a pastime, or a lifestyle, if you want to go that far, that inspires that kind of dedication, that kind of commitment. But if you produce anything for it, you are dealing with multi-billion-dollar companies on the licensing side of things. This isn't like creating a mod for Half-Life or something where you put in a thing that doesn't exist in real life, and that's in the game and it's cool and it's fun. You're putting something out there that has Porsche's logo on it, and it's all of their design language within it, all of which is copyrighted and trademarked, and this, that, and the other. So selling that stuff is really difficult, and it's one of the interesting problems that I think Rennsport are trying to solve with their platform. It'll be interesting to see whether they manage to do that, because details are fairly light at the moment. But if we can get to a stage with the way that licenses are handled between automotive manufacturers, racetrack owners, rights holders, etc., and people that want to create these mods or create content for The Sims with some sort of maybe third party in the middle that can sort of manage that process, blanket negotiations, blanket allowances, whatever it is. But then we have something really interesting, because I can look and say, hey, I really love the Group C era of sports car racing. I might have mentioned before. There's no Lancia LC2. I'd really love to see that. It's a car I love. I've never seen it in a racing sim. Maybe I'll go and, I've dabbled in 3D modeling before. How much harder can it be to go from creating a cube with 4 legs on it to going and producing a, highly optimized model for a racing sim? How hard can it be?
Well, we asked Aris from Kunos a couple of weeks ago about that. I think from memory, Chris, he said it was fairly simple. No, not too much to it.
It takes like an evening. Yeah, something like that. Like, I don't know.
He just puts everything in a random number generator, though, doesn't he, Aris?
But you had it here first. Breaking news.
Yeah, I would only say that of someone I respected deeply. So, to caveat that.
So on that note, then, because we haven't got much time, because we want to go and do some laps on the Nordschleife. But just looking ahead, and we touched on it there with Rennsport, there's a question I've asked a few people now that I'm going to ask you, which is, you're going to teleport. Well, teleport, Chris, help me out here. Teleport? Do I mean teleport? Time capsule? You're going to go forward in time? Would that be a teleport? We can discuss that afterwards. We'll discuss that during the race. 2 different things. You're going to take a time capsule from here to 5 years in the future, right? What is the biggest difference that you're seeing in sim racing when you're there?
Good question. I think esports will be considerably bigger. It is, at this stage, a fairly underrepresented part of sim racing in terms of audience. I think the audience is lagging behind the investment, and the audience is lagging behind the willingness and the intent of the various companies that are getting skin in the game. It feels to me, to some extent, like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because so many people are involved at such a high level with such big budgets that it sort of eventually will find its way through brute force and ignorance if necessary. I think esports will be big. We already see it having a huge influence on the direction of things like the way sims are being developed to cater towards it, and platforms and everything else. So I think that'll be the biggest difference. I can't see hardware being massively different. And I think the sims themselves are in a position where they're in just a sort of gradual evolution process as well. So I think to touch back to something Chris asked earlier, I think we have reached a level of maturity with hardware where we're going to have slow progressions and then the occasional leaps, and we're at that with sims as well. I think the next big move is from esports.
Is that because is the reason that hardware and the sims themselves are growing at a slow pace now, is that because sim racing is just that? It's trying to simulate racing. So there kind of is an end point here where what you do in your sim is very, very similar to or simulating racing, and we've been on this curve getting towards it, and now we're so unbelievably close. If you assume that you can never get G-force, or you can maybe simulate G-force, with the margin that's left is so small.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's sort of true with anything. It's probably one of those things that's got, it's called Dave's law or something. As you try to approach perfection, you need to double your efforts to,
the law of
for every,
return.
it's a law of diminishing returns situation, certainly. But I'm sure there is, something that is more specific than that, that someone in the comments will inevitably point out. And then I'll have learned something, and that's great. But yeah, I think the reality is, in the early stages of development of sim racing, improvements were big. They were big leaps. You'd go from having a 2D single line drawing of the outline of a car like you had in Revs, to a few years later to everything being a sort of quasi 3D environment. I don't think it was a full 3D environment, but it looked like it was a three-dimensional environment in full color, or VGA or VGA. Whether you can call either of those things full color is a debate I'm not willing to get into right now. But and then leaping forward to like the PlayStation generation, the accessibility that brings, and the law of diminishing returns does step in quite hard. And I think iRacing's a great case in point. I can't remember exactly when iRacing launched, but it's been around a good sort of decade now, a better part thereof. And yeah, the improvements to that have slowed down dramatically, and that's true across the board. I think the biggest difference between, say, Assetto Corsa Competizione and Assetto Corsa, a difference of 5 years, is the visual, on the visual side. Sure, the sounds are a bit better, and some of the multiplayer stuff's handled a bit better. The physics are a bit more refined, but those are they're steps, not leaps. So, in answer to your question, Tom, yes.
Yes, thank you. How about you? What direction do you want to go in?
In terms of content, or just where do I want to see sim racing going?
Well, I suppose I kind of see, you are a content creator, but I would argue that you're more than just that in the sim racing world. You have a brand, you have a cap, which isn't on right now.
I don't anymore. It's gone.
The cap,
no more hat.
Full time, is it that? Not
I've gradually retired it, along with the phrase "Hello, fellow sim racers," which I used for years. Then Jardier started using it, and I thought, finally, I can stop saying this thing. People still come up to me and say, "Oh, hello, fellow sim racer." I haven't said that for 18 months, and I haven't worn the cap in a video for about 6 months, and people still ask, "Where's the cap?" So these legacies die hard.
So, but this is kind of my point, right? Is that you've kind of built a brand. As you're not just a YouTuber. You have a personal brand. You do commentary with esports and bits and pieces. So, where do you kind of see yourself going in sim racing? Have you got an idea, or?
I think I touched on it earlier. I would love to be at a stage where I can produce content purely for the sake of creativity, for the love of producing interesting narrative driven stuff within sim racing, whether that is in the same type of videos I produce now, or becoming a bit more grandiose with it. Probably not. Most of the ideas that I have are more about scale, so it'd be the similar kind of videos. So rather than for example, reviewing a sim racing cockpit, I would want to explore 15 different DIY options for sim racing cockpits, and just with a budget and a team and the space and time to take the ideas that I currently sort of have for a video and can do, but execute them on a level that I think is not possible right now. So rather than, it's not a pedal review, it's a review of all of the pedals, or just a comparative thing, rather than knocking up a dodgy mod track in Racetrack Builder for Assetto Corsa. It's actually commissioning someone to produce that thing properly, releasing it to the community, and focusing more on the story side of it. Or it's all I think for me, the interest still is in finding a better way to tell the story, finding a better way to communicate my passion for sim racing, and finding a way to keep making it fun.
Talking of which, let's go sim racing.
I'm not really into that.
So prerequisite of the podcast, I'm afraid. So we're going to go around and do some laps, and whilst we are doing those laps, we've had a few questions come in on the chat. So once I've got into my car,
what am I gonna drive?
Everything's still working. Amazing.
In fact, we've already got a few comments. It's a shock to see Chris without his trademark hat.
There we go.
Where's your?
Yep,
hang on, no. Where is the cap? But also, the same person's also asked what your favorite fish is. So let's start with that. What is your favorite fish?
Oh, well, okay. Well, fish. Now that's an interesting question, because my now 2.5-year-old son has taken a bit of an interest in fish. I used to keep tropical fish, so we've been looking at some options. I quite like the idea of an African cichlid tank at the moment. So I don't have a specific favourite, but some Lake Malawi cichlids would be quite nice. I can get you geographically close, but you'll have to take specifics into your own hands.
I wonder if this viewer knew that you had an interest in fish, or if that was a lucky guess. That was one of those.
That's unless it's my wife. I think it's deeply unlikely.
I was not expecting such a thorough answer, if I'm being honest. I'm pretty impressed. But where does the love of fish come from?
My love of fish would definitely be a gross mischaracterization. No, I'm an animal lover. I've always kept quite a lot of animals. Sorry, my ability to answer questions while driving a Porsche 962 around the Nordschleife definitely isn't what I'd like it to be. No, I've always
do one stream a year, right?
This is why I do one stream a year. The big problem actually with streaming for me is that I get the same kind of comments that I do on YouTube with the streaming, which is largely very nice, very detailed technical questions. So I'm trying to have a race and people are asking me, about monitor recommendations, or, how to set up this, that, or the other, what I would do to go faster on the setup with, the Lamborghini Huracan at Spa, or this, that, and the other. And, it's difficult to focus on a race to the level necessary. Oh, no, we've got Ferrari F2004 behind me. Let's let them go.
God, what a guy. What a pain. What a hooligan on the track.
Is that you, Tom, perchance?
It's me. I'm just following you. I'm just following behind you.
Right, well, I won't let you through then.
That why I can't. That car is wide.
Well, this is it. That's why I was. Woo!
Looks like
always on the brakes. It's fine if you're concentrating, but as I pointed out to you before we went live, you picked the long tail, the Langhek, which is specifically Le Mans specification that has extremely low levels of downforce, which arguably isn't ideal for the Nordschleife, because even off the power through a simple corner like that, I'm losing the back end. That's it's tricky. I did a lap here earlier in the 962C short tail, my sort of my go-to, and it's a car I love. And I thought, we're doing the Nordschleife, there's a strong possibility that Tom is going to put a 962 in there. I haven't driven it around here in absolutely forever, so I'll do one lap to test out the sim. And it was joyous. It was incredible to drive, and this is 70% the same. The problem is the 30% that's different is very, very, very different in a truly terrifying way.
Yeah, I remember it was one of the tails, and I've obviously got the wrong tail.
Yeah, well, it's standard sort of Le Mans setup is the low drag version, so you'll often see. Got that wrong. you'll frequently see versions of sports cars and prototypes with lower drag config for Le Mans because of the long old straights, which were more of a factor before they put in the chicanes in the Mistral. But still today they're running lower downforce configs. But back in the good old days, a lot of
fun to drive.
It is, yeah. I'm regretting not setting up a brake profile because I'm snatching the brakes a lot while I'm trying to work out what car I had this set of hoisting belts set up for previously.
That is an interesting thing about sim racing that I've mentioned before. In fact, I've mentioned to a couple of people. I think I spoke about it to Aris, and I think I mentioned it to Jem Hepworth during our interview. I kind of pointed out that sim racing versus motorsport, you have an additional layer, which is the kind of the medium between the person and the car. So in real world motorsport, you have to set up your car for the track. In sim racing, you have to set up your rig for and your car for the track and the driver in some way. So you have this like additional layer of setting up. So if you go into two different cars in the real world, the brake pedal will feel very different. You go into two different cars in the sim racing world, the brake pedal feels exactly the same. So there's kind of like an additional layer that you have to compensate for in sim racing.
Yeah, no, very true. And it's one of the things about that I find, and a lot of people find challenging about iRacing actually, is the because of the approach of. Yeah, I did have a little bit of a lock the brakes there moment. Sorry. Other Chris.
No,
oh, right.
No,
I'm not crashing.
At a proper spin.
We need a better system than calling everyone Chris. It's all right. I've run wide now. Oh, well, there you go. It's all fine then. Whoa!
Ooh,
I
looked up and saw myself on camera and instantly took a corner and spun.
I actually did that during Expo last year. So I, for whatever reason, ended up on stage racing the TCR cars in the final or whatever I can't remember what the event was for. But I was on stage racing, and I saw it on the big screen. I was like, "It's like my livery. That can't be my livery. Is that my livery? It is my livery. Oh wow, see ya. It is my livery." And then I thought, well,
that's what you get for the low drag version, mate.
Yeah, that was significant. I mean, yeah, make the most of it while you can, Chris. Yeah, so when I was on stage looking at the screen up above, I was like, it's definitely me. So I thought, I'm going to just weave on the straight and see if it is me. So I started weaving on the straight. And then I was quite nervous because there's obviously hundreds of people in the expo hall. I was going round, I was going wide, and I was doing it anyway. I took my headphones off halfway around, just kind of pulled over onto the grass, like span, and then reset to pits. Took my headset off, and I just heard the commentators going, well, that was about the worst hot lap we could have introduced track to you with. So they picked a random car to like talk about the track and talk about how the cars were going to take it, and they stupidly chose me when I was going around the car.
That you couldn't have said stupidly chose me at a better moment there. I think.
Apologies. I think that was a bit of netcode there. We call it netcode.
So it's certainly one way of looking at it.
Luckily, I've got some pretty severe brakes on this guy.
Yeah, pretty severe acceleration too. I mean, the reality
need
is
to start practicing this track because this is the second time it's been on the podcast, and this is probably the fourth time I've driven it.
Can I give a bit of advice? If you put a fan vote out there and it has the word Nordschleifer in it, it's going to be on here every week.
Okay.
Yeah, we might need to exclude it from options every now and then. I tell you what, this car around this track is epic.
As is this. It's more of a handful than the short tail, as you'd expect. But it's good fun. The other problem is I wasn't necessarily expecting to drive an H-pattern car today, so I didn't put the correct stick on my car. So it's a bit weird driving it with the flappy paddle, but I'm making it work.
Yeah, so GP Laps got very upset with me a couple of episodes ago because I was driving the Lotus Type 25 with a flappy gearbox, the flappy paddle gearbox.
Yeah, Jake was right to be upset with you, and you know, if he's watching this now, you know, I'm with him in spirit, if not in reality. So whoa, I wasn't even on the throttle there, and it spat me off on the corner exit. I think that might be a bit of
GP Laps episode. I had the best spin of my life in that race. So much so where I hit the wall and then my car was like just spinning in a circle, like glitched or whatever. I had to reset to pits and take a penalty for it. It was a rather spectacular crash.
I really loved his choice of track. So he had it was the Lotus Type 25, and it was at Watkins Glen, but a modded 60s version of Watkins Glen with like the old hay bales, completely different track layout, and just like people stood at the side of the road, and it was incredible.
Yeah, that was a cool track.
Watkins Glen is definitely one of my favourite tracks in the world. Right, new or old versions, I think they've managed to keep a lot of the character of the way the circuit flows. It's an extraordinary place.
Yeah, it was tricky in that Type 25, but I really loved it. Once I kind of got used to it, kind of worked out what its character was, I started to enjoy it a lot more. Like it was kind of like a slow burner. It was a slow burner, but when it clicked, it really clicked.
I didn't have the same experience with that one.
You did not. You were not converted.
No.
Oh, another 2004.
Whoa!
Who was that? Someone's just... Did you get hit there, did you?
Yeah, there's a little bit of contact, a little bit of avoidance, and then, locking the brakes on while trying to do all of that.
For the purposes of the tape, you were hit.
Well, that's the problem with tape. You can't do that. The setup on this does not like going around carousel. Needs to be raised about 4 feet, I think.
Chris, when you're... Well, okay, I shouldn't assume. I was about to say when you're racing to relax, but maybe not everyone does. Do you ever just jump on the sim just to relax and chill out? Or are you always...
Yeah, absolutely. What I tend to do, though, is play stuff that I don't feature on the channel. So I have several titles that I generally choose not to make content about, and often it's actually in quite a deliberate way. So the Formula One series by Codemasters are absolutely sort of sacred to me as just an unwind and drive for fun title rather than bring into my job, so to speak. The reason for that, more than anything, is that they're just great games. Woo!
Yeah.
Do you
play online, or do you go for the campaigns?
A bit of both.
A bit of both.
When I do play online, it's not with my name.
No.
Oh, nice. As a content creator, I think that's something that's very important. A lot of gaming content creators, whether it be sim racing or first-person shooters or whatever, they start to only play video games when they're making content, and then they just kind of lose that I love video games in general, you know? And I think it's great that you keep one game or two games or however many games you keep, and you just say, I'm not going to be doing these games for content. You know, I always recommend that to people. When I used to be a streamer, I was like, keep the games that you truly, truly love off the internet and just play them for the old school enjoyment just like you used to. Because at a certain point, when you're a content creator, it'll start to feel like a job, and then you kind of lose your love for certain things like sim racing or playing AC or something, you know? Just have to keep that.
Yeah, definitely. And there are certain titles that just don't necessarily lend themselves well to the type of content I create. So, I didn't do any rally titles at all in my sim racing content, and that's just purely because it's really difficult to sort of commentate while listening to pace notes, and there are creators out there that do a wonderful job of that, but we getting propelled along by the diff there.
There are that's one skill that I would love, learning how to drift properly. No matter how many times I try it, unless I'm on Forza Horizon, I can't seem to drift properly in any games.
Well, that's the beauty of Forza Horizon, is it just makes that so easy. The difficulty with Forza Horizon is to not drift.
Yeah, actually, that's a very true statement.
So we've got some questions that have come in. So whilst I'm driving behind you, I'm going to try and ask them. So Peter Kasbergen says, can I ask all of you what you think is graphically the best looking sim? Tough one, that. Gridfinder, Chris, do you want to go first? Who are you, Chris Finder?
Chris Finder? What's the best graphic?
The best looking sim.
Well, I don't know. ACC looks fabulous. And like when I play Forza Horizon, it looks great. But the thing is that off in the distance, you start to see some, they stop rendering some things and it's a little rough on the edges out there. So for me, personally, I like ACC. Now, I don't play every single sim either. I only play some of the arcade ones, AC and ACC, and that's about it. So, like, I don't have any real experience in Automobilista 2, which I hear that one's pretty good.
Oh,
even though I bought it because, well, it was on sale. But yeah, I'd have to say ACC for me personally on the ones that I actually do play.
Yeah.
How about you, Tom?
ACC is tough to beat, but like curveball.
Okay.
Assetto Corsa with the right mods and the right settings, the right track at the right time of day. I think it's hard to beat. And I know the graphics of the side of the track and the detail in things like trees and grass and barriers might not be as good, but there's something about the soul mods and just there's something about the way that the lighting can be created in AC that I just can't get over. So that would be my curveball answer, although I know that ACC straight out of the box is a better looking sim.
I guess then I would probably agree with you there. I just don't have the patience to go through all the setup on it. Like I'll install something and then just use a default setup and not really toy around with it very much. So that could be lending itself to the reason I think ACC is better, because I'm just like, just run it on very high. We're done. Cool. Play.
Yeah. Also, just before we ask Chris, iRacing. Now I know it's not. I don't know. There's something about it that makes it almost look a little bit more cartoony in comparison. But again, the right track. So I was racing Phillip Island in the F3s, and I don't know what it is about their surface, like the way that they kind of design their road surfaces. But the time of day for I think it was like the week 4 race in season whatever we're in now. When you went up the hill in the middle of the track, also down the hill, or up and then down the hill in the middle of the track in Phillip Island, the way the light was coming off the track and the way that you could see well off into the distance, that was pretty impressive. So iRacing can have its moment too, I think. So Chris,
yeah, okay, yeah, sure. Let's go. I've got opinions.
I think.
Yeah, so I think it's one of those situations where lots of sims do lots of things very well. So it's difficult to give a this one's the best kind of answer. Because, for example, I think the lighting effects in the Madness Engine games are probably the outright best. The diff is unforgiving in this. So yeah, the lighting effects in the Madness Engine games are fantastic. So The latest
What
incarnation of
games-
that being Automobilista 2.
Okay.
And the Project Cars series were on that. But so Automobilista 2, in terms of the kind of immersion factor, is pretty amazing. But equally, some of the best looking stuff is really filmic, and it kind of like you're in an episode of Top Gear or in a Michael Bay movie at times, rather than necessarily reality. Which is where I think some of the lighting effects in Soul are using the Soul mod for ACC are a little better in terms of realism. They certainly don't necessarily look as dynamic or epic. Then we have ACC, which I think does a good all-round job. Visually it's very pleasing. It has a lot of detail. The trackside stuff is there in force, and everything's beautifully modeled, and everything's got a sort of sense of place, and it feels like a live racetrack, something that often is missing from other sims. So those would be my main things. To pick up on Tom's point about iRacing, there are definitely situations where the lighting looks really, really good. It just doesn't have for me at least, doesn't have the consistency of some of those others. But it's a sim that has chosen to prioritize other aspects. And if we're going to just pick a title that looks all round the best, then I think we probably have to say Gran Turismo, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, Gran Turismo is, but why is that though? Why is that the best? How have they achieved that? What are they at the expense of what?
Well, that's an interesting question. That
apparently it's netcode lately.
Yeah. There's a title they've been developing for years and years and years for a massive audience. The scale of audience between R Factor 2 and Gran Turismo is just unfathomable, and the size of team involved, the size of budget involved is massive. So and that's one of the considerations why people like Kunos may have made when opting to use the Unreal Engine, for example, which certainly is a huge contributing factor to how good that sim looks. Polyphony can afford to throw a lot of resource at building, developing, and refining their own engine in a way that a Kunos or a Sector 3 or Studio 397 or whoever else just absolutely couldn't, because the market for a slavishly nerdy sim like ACC is significantly smaller than the world's best-selling driving game. Look, Forza Horizon, you mentioned earlier, Chris, is a great example of what the sort of thing you can do, where you can put your development dollars if you're trying to appeal to a broader market. Unquestionably, Forza and Gran Turismo look a heck of a lot better than AC and R Factor and iRacing, but they don't drive as well.
Right.
Okay, so we are out of time, and I am. I made a joke earlier about. Luckily, we've got a nice, easy track, so I'm not going to be sweating. Turns out I am. Turns out I had the force feedback turned up far too high for what we were doing there, and I am
full
now.
power.
Yeah, pretty much. That was like a workout.
Yeah, you kind of have to have the force feedback up high in a car like this to be able to really sort of feel it around, I feel. So yeah, I'll join you in the sweat boat.
Okay, we've got one more question, and it's from AJH1990, who says, classic question I've never asked you, Chris. You can drive any car and any track combo from any era. What do you pick?
Porsche 962 Short Tail and the Nordschleifer. No, sensible
Jeez, Tom.
answer. Sensible answer. Ooh. I think it would have to be and it might be a bit of a curveball, the GT1 Celine from 2004, 2006 ish. Where would I drive it? So many choices, so many really good choices. Maybe somewhere like Suzuka. I think there's a big part of me that wants to pick really specifically like nerdy, era appropriate, and car appropriate tracks. Which is why say something like the 962 or 956. The Nordschleife is actually probably a really good answer.
But you're actually thinking Jeddah, right?
yeah. Abu Dhabi.
Or the Miami Grand Prix.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. That is definitely better.
Did you choose a track before I get? Because we got another question. Did you choose a track?
No, it's too hard. Sorry, AJ.
Too hard. I can't. Okay. This is kind of a broad question. What is your favorite? This is from Thrill Junkies. What is your favorite GT3 car to drive on any sim?
I've got to go with the Bentley. For entertainment factor. I think it's far from the best at times, depending on the sim. I mean, that does limit us in terms of sims as well. With GT3 cars, and to some extent GTEs as well, I always find myself drawn to the front engine ones. I like having to hustle the front end into corners and then it wanting to get away from you as you step on the gas. There's something a bit more sort of classic GT car about that than driving something like a McLaren or an Audi or a Lambo, which are just really nicely sorted out mid-engine track weapons. So I think the thing that appeals to me about driving classic cars from the 60s and 70s and 80s kind of lives on a bit in the Bentley in so much as it ever possibly could in GT3. So yeah, I have to say it would be ACC for GT racing, just because of the detail in the way the sim reproduces the racing experience as much as anything, if not the driving experience. So yeah, long-winded answer once again. Sorry.
Well, it was another thorough answer, and I'm pretty conscious that Chris and I are just chilling in our seats, just kind of on the Zoom call now, just asking you questions whilst you're still hounding around the track, getting a sweat on, providing some pretty thorough answers. But Chris, thank you so much for coming on. I can tell we can't stop you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. It's been good. Is there anything you want to finish off with? Is there anything you've got coming up that you want to tell people about?
There is a absolutely massive announcement about something I'm doing that I can't say anything about, but it's coming tomorrow.
Oh, exciting!
So I'm just going to park up the car now because we'll call this done. Put a spoon in it. Yeah, massive announcement tomorrow about something I cannot wait to tell everyone about. It's an absolutely dream come true thing, and
well, just in case there's anyone in the audience at the moment that doesn't follow you on Twitter or Insta, wherever you primarily announce your stuff, what is your username over there?
Yeah, at Chris Haye on Instagram, and I think it's at Chris_A Haye SR on Twitter. I've got at Chris Haye, but it's registered to an account that I no longer have access to, and Twitter won't give me it back. So,
that's Twitter. Yeah, I actually saw that
a rubbish one.
I always read it as Chris Haye Senior. I'm like,
Chris Haye Senior. Oh, I hadn't thought about. Oh no,
I have been too actually.
Yeah.
Who's Chris Haye Junior?
SR for sim racing.
Yeah, right.
Right. All right, Tom. Before we round out, no. Important thing. Before we round out the podcast, something needs clearing up here. two capital letters next to each other, you read as letters, right? This is
Okay.
really relevant. This is really relevant. If it's a big letter, then a little letter, you read it as a word, which is why it's the Ford Ka. It's not the Ford KA. Big K, little A. This is from Ford themselves. You know, I rang them up. I mean, it's in their press releases. It was always called the Ford Ka, but everyone in the UK at least called it the KA, despite it being a big K and a little A. I never got that.
Yeah,
Like,
or the Ford car. That's the other way of
that as
pronouncing
well.
it, is the
Well,
Ford car, which makes it sound like a very generic model.
It honestly makes it sound like you're just like with an accent saying car.
Exactly, yeah. You know, Nigella